collective punishment is a form of retaliation whereby a suspected perpetrator's family members, friends, acquaintances, sect, neighbors or entire ethnic group is targeted. The punished group may often have no direct association with the other individuals or groups, or direct control over their actions. In times of war and armed conflict, collective punishment has resulted in atrocities, and is a violation of the laws of war and the Geneva Conventions. Historically, occupying powers have used collective punishment to retaliate against and deter attacks on their forces by resistance movements. History. 2nd century BC During the Qin dynasty of China, Emperor Qin Shi Huang upheld his rule by enforcing strict laws, with the most serious of crimes, such as treason, punishable by what is known as 9 familial exterminations. This involved the execution of the perpetrator's entire families as well as the perpetrators themselves, where the members are categorized into 9 groups. The process of familial extermination was carried on by subsequent Chinese dynasties for serious crimes, with a significant number of recorded sentences during the Ming dynasty, until the punishment was officially repealed by the government of the Qing dynasty in 1905. 9th 15th century In the tithing, groups of 10 men swearing the Frank Pledge, the compulsory sharing of responsibility and punishment, was in use at least since the time of Alfred the Great in the 9th century. The Statute of Winchester of 1285 provided that the whole €100 shall be answerable for any theft or robbery. 18th century The Intolerable Acts were seen as a collective punishment of Massachusetts for the Boston Tea Party. 19th century The principle of collective punishment was laid out by Union General William Tecumseh Sherman in his Special Field Order 120, November 9, 1864, which laid out the rules for his march to the sea in the American Civil War. v. To Army Corps commanders alone is entrusted the power to destroy mills, houses, cotton gins, etc., and for them this general principle is laid down: in districts and neighborhoods where the army is unmolested, no destruction of such property should be permitted. But should guerrillas or bushwhackers molest our march, or should the inhabitants burn bridges, obstruct roads, or otherwise manifest local hostility, then army commanders should order and enforce a devastation more or less relentless according to the measure of such hostility. 20th century United States, in 1906, 167 black U.S. soldiers stationed in Brownsville, Texas were dishonorably discharged on orders of President Theodore Roosevelt in response to the shooting of 2 white citizens in the middle of the night of August 13, 1906. One man was killed and the other, a police lieutenant, was injured, and it was never discovered who the shooters were, though they were presumed to have been members of the nearby Fort Brown. The soldiers of Companies Bravo, Charlie, and Delta of the 25th Infantry Regiment, many of whom served in the Philippines and Cuba during America's war with Spain, were punished for the crime collectively and they were denied pensions. Nazi Germany. In Poland. During the Nazi occupation of Poland, the Germans applied collective responsibility. Any kind of help given to a person of Jewish faith or origin was punishable by death, and that not only for the rescuers but also for their family. This was widely publicized by the Germans. During the occupation, for every German killed by a Pole, 100 to 400 Poles were shot in retribution. Communities were held collectively responsible for the purported Polish counterattacks against the invading German troops. Mass executions of round-up hostages were conducted every single day during the Wehrmacht advance across Poland in September 1939 and thereafter. Poland lost over 5 million citizens during the occupation by Nazi Germany, mostly civilians. In other countries. British forces in the Boer Wars and the Germans in both the Franco-Prussian War and World War I justified such actions as being in accord with the laws of war then in force. In the summer of 1941 during World War II, Nazi troops executed several hundred people in Condomari, Alicianos, Candinos and elsewhere in retaliation for the participation of Cretan civilians to the Battle of Crete. During its occupation by the Axis from 1941 to 1944, Greece suffered a remarkably high death toll due to reprisals against the support and involvement of the population in the resistance. Large-scale massacres were carried out in places such as Domnico, Komeno, Vianos, Dracula, Kalavrita, Masuvino, Distomo, Dros, Chortiotis and many others. In Yugoslavia, Nazi troops killed 434 men in 3 villages near Kragujevac on October 19, 1941 as punishment for previous actions of the Serbian resistance movement. In the next 2 days, the Nazis also killed more than 13,000 people in Kraljevo, Kragujevac, and Sumarice, including 300 students from Kragujevac First High School. In 1942, the Germans destroyed the village of Lidis, Czechoslovakia, killing 340 inhabitants as collective punishment or reprisal for that year's assassination of Reinhard Heydrich by nearby commandos. In the French village of Oradour-sur-Glane 642 of its inhabitants men, women, and children were slaughtered by the German Waffen-SS in 1944. In the Dutch village of Putten and the Italian villages of Sant'Anna di Stazzema and Martisaboto, as well as in the Soviet village of Kortelisi, large-scale reprisal killings were carried out by the Germans. Expulsion of Germans after the war. The expulsion of Germans after World War II by Soviets, Poles and Czechoslovaks has been sometimes justified as collective punishment. The goal was to punish the Germans. The Allies declared them collectively guilty of Nazi war crimes. In the US and UK, the ideas of German collective guilt and collective punishment originated not with the US and British people, but on higher policy levels. Not until late in the war did the US public assign collective responsibility to the German people. British Empire. According to the New York Times, the British planned collective punishment for aiding Reds, rewards and more troops in Malaya in 1951. The British used collective punishment as an official policy to suppress the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya in 1952. In 1956, Britain officially used collective punishment in Cyprus in the form of evicting families from their homes and closing shops anywhere British soldiers and police had been murdered. To obtain information about the identities of the attackers today, it is considered by most nations contradictory to the modern concept of due process, where each individual receives separate treatment based on his or her role in the crime in question. Article 33 of the Fourth Geneva Convention specifically forbids collective punishment. USSR, Joseph Stalin's mass deportations of many nationalities of the USSR to remote regions is an example of officially orchestrated collective punishment. The partial removal of potentially trouble-making ethnic groups was a technique used consistently by Stalin during his career. Poles, Romanians, Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians, Volga Germans, Chechens, and Inushis. Shortly before, during and immediately after World War II, Stalin conducted a series of deportations on a huge scale which profoundly affected the ethnic map of the Soviet Union. 2. It is estimated that between 1941 and 1949 nearly 3.3 million were deported to Siberia and the Central Asian republics. By some estimates, up to 43% of the resettled population died of diseases and malnutrition. The deportation started with Poles from Belarus, Ukraine and European Russia 1932 to 1936. Koreans in the Russian Far East were deported in 1937. After the Soviet invasion of Poland following the corresponding German invasion that marked the start of World War II in 1939, the Soviet Union annexed eastern parts of the Second Polish Republic. During 1939–1941 1.45 million people inhabiting the region were deported by the Soviet regime, of whom 63.1% were Poles, and 7.4% were Jews. The same followed in the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. More than 200,000 people are estimated to have been deported from the Baltic in 1940 to 1953. 10% of the entire adult Baltic population was deported or sent to labor camps. Volga Germans and 7 nationalities of the Crimea and the Northern Caucasus were deported: the Crimean Tatars, Kalmyks, Chechens, Inush, Balkars, Karakas, and Meskhetian Turks. All Crimean Tatars were deported en masse, in a form of collective punishment. Pogroms may be considered examples of unofficial collective punishment which resemble rioting. About 14 million East Germans were moved out of what was Germany. 3 million of them died. Azerbaijan, Black January was a massacre of civilians committed by the Red Army and the Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic in 1990. The Human Rights Watch report entitled Black January in Azerbaijan states, indeed, the violence used by the Soviet Army on the night of January 19, 20 was so out of proportion to the resistance offered by Azerbaijanis as to constitute an exercise in collective punishment. 21st century North Korea. In North Korea, political prisoners are sent to the Kwon-Li-so concentration camps along with their relatives without any fair trial. North Korean citizens convicted of more serious political crimes are sentenced to life imprisonment, and the summary 2 generations of their family will be born in the camps as part of the 3 generations of punishment policy instigated by state founder Kim Il-sung in 1948. North Korea's political penal labor colonies, transliterated Kwon-Li-so or Kwon-Li-so, constitute one of 3 forms of political imprisonment in the country, the other 2 being what Hawk translates as short-term detention forced labor centers, and long-term prison labor camps for misdemeanor and felony offenses respectively. In total, there are an estimated 150,000 to 200,000 political prisoners housed within the North Korean imprisonment system. In contrast to these other systems, the condemned are sent there without any form of judicial process as are their immediate 3 generations of family members in a form of Sippenhaft. North Korea's Kwon-Li-so consist of a series of sprawling encampments measuring kilometers long and kilometers wide. The number of these encampments has varied over time. They are located mainly in the valleys between high mountains, mostly in the northern provinces of North Korea. There are between 5,000 and 50,000 prisoners per Kwon-Li-so, totaling perhaps some 150,000 to 200,000 prisoners throughout North Korea. The Kwon-Li-so are usually surrounded at their outer perimeters by barbed wire fences punctuated with guard towers and patrolled by heavily armed guards. The encampments include self-contained closed village compounds for single persons, usually the alleged wrongdoers, and other closed, fenced-in villages for the extended families of the wrongdoers. Israel. The current blockade of Gaza has been criticized by the International Committee of the Red Cross, in a United Nations report, and by various other organizations as collective punishment aimed at the Palestinians. The Israeli practice of demolishing the houses of Palestinians who are detained, suspected or convicted for crimes against them has also been alleged to be a form of collective punishment, as their family will be punished for their acts, if any, by losing their homes, in violation of international law. India. The 1984 Anti-Sikh riots or the 1984 Sikh massacre was a riot directed against Sikhs in India, by anti-Sikh mobs, in response to the assassination of Indira Gandhi by her Sikh bodyguards. This caused more than 3,000 deaths. The CBI is of the opinion that the acts of violence were well organized with support from the then Delhi police officials and the central government headed by Indira Gandhi's son, Rajiv Gandhi. Rajiv, a Congress Party member who was sworn in as the Prime Minister after his mother's death, when asked about the riots said, "When a big tree falls, the earth shakes." In 2011, Human Rights Watch reported the government of India had yet to prosecute those responsible for the mass killings. The 2011 WikiLeaks cable leaks revealed that the United States was convinced about the complicity of the Indian government led by the Indian National Congress in the riots, and termed it as opportunism, and hatred of the Congress government against Sikhs. Also in 2011, a new set of mass graves were discovered in Haryana, and Human Rights Watch reported that widespread anti-Sikh attacks in Haryana were part of broader revenge attacks in India. Pakistan. On May 20, 2008, the Pakistan Army conducted collective punishment against a village called Spankai, located in the frontier province of Pakistan. The operation was called Zalzala, which is Arabic for earthquake. At first, the Pakistan Army swept through with helicopter gunships, artillery and tanks that crunched across a parched riverbed. After 4 days of heavy fighting, 25 militants and 6 soldiers died. The rest of the militants retreated up the valley. After the capture of the village, the army discovered bomb factories, detonation-ready suicide jackets and schools for teenage suicide bombers. The Pakistan Army immediately decided to punish the village for harboring the Taliban and allowing the militants to operate in and from the village to conduct further terror attacks in Pakistan. Bulldozers and explosives experts turned Spenkai's bazaar into a mile-long pile of rubble. Petrol stations, shops, and even parts of the hospital were leveled or blown up. The villagers were forbidden from returning to their homes. Pakistani commanders, who were speaking to the media, insisted they had been merciful in their application of collective punishment, a practice invented by the British who demarcated the tribal areas over a century ago. South Africa still retains the apartheid-era law of common purpose, by which those who make up part of a group can be punished for the crimes of other group members, even if they were not themselves actively involved. In August 2012 this came to public attention when 270 miners were threatened with prosecution for participating in a demonstration. During the demonstration at the Marikana mine, 34 miners were shot by police. Many of the miners were armed. When prosecutors said they would pursue charges against other miners who were part of the protest, there was a public outcry. Syria. Throughout most of Syria's ongoing civil war, collective punishment has been a recurring method used by the Syrian government to quell opposition cities and suburbs throughout the country, whereby entire cities are besieged, shelled, and destroyed, if that city is deemed as pro-opposition. Upon retaking the capital Damascus after the Battle of Damascus, the Syrian government began a campaign of collective punishment against Sunni suburbs in and around the capital which had supported FSA presence in their neighborhoods. In opposition-controlled cities and districts in Aleppo province and Aleppo city, reports indicate that the Syrian government is attacking civilians at bread bakeries with artillery rounds and rockets, with the reports indicating that the bakeries were shelled indiscriminately. HRW said these are war crimes, as the only military targets in the areas were the few rebels manning the bakeries, and that dozens of civilians were killed. In Idlib province in the northwest of the country, entire cities were shelled and bombed for sheltering opposition activists and rebels, with the victims mostly civilians, along with heavy financial losses. Theories, rather than attempt to discover some contra-causal free will, modern philosophers will usually use notions of intention to establish individual moral responsibility. This Kantian approach may not be the only way to assess responsibility, especially considering groups may need a unique approach to individuals. For instance, there is the issue that consistent individuals may nevertheless experience a discursive dilemma when they try to act as a group. Philosopher Kenneth Shockley suggests we focus on group faults and the punishments that would bring change. Punishments, for a group, might include full or partial disbanding, weakening bonds between members, or deinstitutionalizing some of the group's norms. Nita Crawford says groups can be expected to change, but also apologize and make amends. That might mean groups must forfeit important parts of themselves. In this case, groups are being held responsible for organizing or incentivizing harmful behaviors. Shockley calls this the group's coordinating control over members. He says group responsibility can mitigate individual responsibility. See also, AIC, collective guilt, decimation, feud, Fourth Geneva Convention, population transfer in the Soviet Union, reprisal, Sippenhaft, terrorism, 9 exterminations, family members of traitors of the motherland. References. External links: U.S. Department of Justice's page on asset forfeiture.